It was a late night in the early 1950s, inside a packed Atlantic City ballroom where the air smelled of whiskey, perfume, and power. Glasses clinked, then stopped. A chair scraped the floor too loudly. The band kept playing, but the music suddenly felt swallowed, like it couldn't breathe. On stage, Dean Martin smiled the wrong smile at the wrong woman, in a room owned by the wrong kind of men. Jerry Lewis felt it instantly. The shift, the silence, the danger Dean didn't see until the room itself leaned in. This was never about jealousy or a reckless joke taken too far. In rooms like this, flirtation wasn't romance. It was territory. Nightclubs on the East Coast didn't just sell entertainment in the early 1950s. They sold access, influence, and quiet obedience. Every table closest to the stage meant something. Every smile was watched. Every gesture was weighed. Dean Martin had spent years surviving on charm. His confidence came from believing that humor could smooth anything sharp, that a grin could turn tension into applause. And most nights he was right. But charm has limits in rooms where ownership isn't spoken, only enforced. Jerry Lewis understood something Dean didn't in that moment. Comedy trained him to read micro shifts, a laugh that doesn't land, a pause that lingers half a second too long, a face that hardens instead of smiling back. While Dean played to the crowd, Jerry felt the crowd disappear. What remained was power, quiet, watching, deciding. This wasn't a moment that exploded. It compressed. No shouting, no threats. Just a tightening silence where one wrong second could turn performance into consequence. And the most dangerous thing in that room wasn't anger. It was certainty. The certainty that someone else was in control. The ballroom looked glamorous from a distance, but up close it felt tight, almost sealed. Low ceilings, heavy smoke, tables crowded too close together, as if the room itself wanted to keep everyone within reach. The best seats weren't near the stage for the view. They were there to remind the performers who was watching. This wasn't Broadway. It wasn't Hollywood. This was a working room, a place where deals were understood without contracts and where entertainers learned quickly which tables mattered more than applause. Managers didn't say much. They didn't have to. A look, a pause, a hand on a shoulder was enough. Dean Martin thrived in spaces like this, or so it seemed. He moved easily, voice smooth, posture loose, smiling like nothing in the world could touch him. To audiences, he looked fearless. To club owners, he looked profitable. Dean had learned that confidence often passed for safety. Jerry Lewis felt the opposite. He paced before shows. He watched people instead of mirrors. He noticed who whispered to whom, who never laughed, who didn't need to. Comedy had taught him that timing wasn't just about jokes. It was about survival. Miss a beat, and the whole act collapses. That night, Jerry noticed the table before Dean did. The stillness, the way the men there didn't drink much, the woman seated among them, beautiful and bored, like decoration that belonged to someone else. When Dean's eyes drifted her way, Jerry's stomach tightened. Dean saw a crowd. Jerry saw a boundary. And in rooms like this, boundaries didn't come with warnings. They came with consequences, delivered quietly, efficiently, and without witnesses. The danger wasn't visible yet, but it was present, waiting. And Jerry knew that once it moved, there would be no time to explain anything at all. The laugh landed, and then it didn't. Dean delivered the line cleanly, just as he always did. A casual glance, a familiar grin, the kind that had carried him through 100 rooms like this before. A few people laughed out of habit. Others didn't at all. The sound thinned, uneven, like applause traveling through water. Jerry felt it before he saw it. A chair moved near the front, not pushed back in anger, pulled forward with intention. Someone stopped clapping mid-motion. The band kept playing, but softer now instinctively, as if the musicians sensed they were no longer the loudest presence in the room. Dean was still facing the crowd when Jerry noticed the table again. The men there hadn't reacted at all. No smiles, no irritation, just attention. Focused, quiet, and complete. One of them leaned slightly toward the woman beside him, not to speak, just enough to remind the room who she belonged to. That was when Jerry knew the line had already been crossed. Dean turned back toward him, ready to continue the routine, unaware that the audience had changed. Jerry stepped half a pace closer than planned. He interrupted the rhythm. A harmless-looking move, a misplaced cue, a joke delivered too early, but it was deliberate. He needed Dean to feel the shift without explaining it. For a fraction of a second, Dean hesitated. In that pause, everything tightened. The air, the room, the distance between the stage and the tables that mattered most. Jerry caught the eye of the manager near the wall. The man didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He simply looked afraid. Jerry leaned in, low enough that the microphone didn't catch it. "Not this one," he said. Dean didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He felt it now. The silence underneath the noise, the weight behind the smiles. He adjusted his posture, changed his tone, smoothed the moment before it could harden. Whatever had been about to happen didn't. Not because the danger wasn't real, but because it had been recognized just in time. And in rooms like this, recognizing danger early was the only kind of mercy anyone ever got. Nothing visible changed. And that was the most frightening part. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. The men at the table didn't move because they didn't need to. Power in rooms like this didn't announce itself. It waited. It let others make mistakes first. Jerry felt his heartbeat in his throat. He had seen this kind of stillness before, backstage and offstage. The moment when a decision had already been made, even if it hadn't been acted on yet. A look held a second too long. A hand disappeared beneath a jacket. Not hurried, not angry, practiced. Dean stood there, calm on the surface, but now fully aware that the room had teeth. The manager finally approached the stage, smiling too hard, clapping louder than necessary. It wasn't encouragement, it was containment, a signal that the night needed to change direction immediately. Jerry took control of the pacing, filling space with noise, with motion, with jokes that didn't land but didn't matter. The goal wasn't laughter anymore. It was time. Seconds passed like minutes. At the table, one of the men shifted his weight. Another leaned back, studying the stage as if calculating distance. No one reached for a weapon, but no one relaxed either. The possibility hovered, unspoken, undeniable. Then it eased. A subtle gesture, a nod so slight it could be missed. The kind of signal that said, not tonight, not forgiveness, not approval, just postponement. The band grew louder again. Glasses clinked, cautiously at first. Conversations resumed, but lower than before. The room exhaled without realizing it had been holding its breath. Dean finished the set without another glance toward the table. Jerry never stopped watching it. Later, walking off stage, Dean let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Jerry's hands were shaking. He hid them in his pockets. Nothing had happened. And yet, everything had. Because both men understood the same truth now. There are moments that don't leave bruises, don't make headlines, don't end careers, but quietly redraw the limits of your world. This was one of them. They didn't speak much as they left the ballroom. The corridor behind the stage was narrow and dim, smelling of sweat, smoke, and old paint. The laughter from the room followed them only as an echo, already thinning, already becoming someone else's memory. A few crew members nodded too politely. No one joked. No one lingered. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. Dean lit a cigarette with steady hands. Too steady. The kind of calm that comes after adrenaline, when the body hasn't caught up with what almost happened. He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed ahead, as if replaying the moment he finally understood what Jerry had seen first. Jerry stayed quiet. His chest still felt tight. The danger was gone, but the awareness remained. The knowledge that timing, not talent, had saved them. One step later, one joke longer, 1 second of pride instead of instinct. Any of it could have changed the ending. Dean broke the silence first. "Good catch," he said lightly, almost casually. Jerry nodded but didn't smile, because this wasn't a catch you celebrated. It was a line you learned never to step over again. That night didn't make the papers. There was no story to deny, no rumor to correct, just an adjustment, invisible to the audience, permanent to the performers. Dean's charm didn't disappear after that, but it sharpened. He became more selective, more distant in rooms like these, less willing to owe anyone anything. And Jerry learned something just as lasting. Comedy wasn't only about getting laughs. It was about control, about knowing when to stop pushing, when to pull someone back, when to end a moment before it demanded a price. That instinct, the one that noticed silence before danger, never left him. They drove away from the club like two men who had survived something no one else could see. Because sometimes the most dangerous nights don't end with violence. They end with understanding. Years later, stories would circulate, some exaggerated, some softened, some sharpened into legend. But the truth of that night didn't need a gunshot to be real. It revealed the difference between performing in a room and belonging to it. Dean Martin was the kind of man audiences believed was untouchable. Smooth voice, easy confidence, a smile that made people feel chosen. But that night showed the limit of charisma when it enters a space governed by ownership, not admiration. In certain rooms, talent didn't grant immunity. It only bought temporary permission. Jerry Lewis understood that instinctively, not because he was braver, but because he was more afraid. Fear sharpened his perception. It taught him to read what wasn't said, to notice when laughter stopped being laughter and became noise filling a void. That sensitivity, often mocked later in his career, was the very thing that kept them alive in moments like this. The night also exposed an unspoken hierarchy of the era. The audience believed the stars were in control. The truth was quieter and far less glamorous. Power sat in the shadows, behind tables that didn't clap, among men who never needed to raise their voices. Performers didn't challenge that power. They navigated around it, or paid for not knowing where it began. This wasn't cowardice. It was survival. And survival came with a cost. After nights like this, something shifts. You laugh a little less freely. You watch exits more closely. You learn that silence can be more dangerous than insults, and that the absence of reaction is often the loudest warning you'll ever get. Nothing happened that night, but something was learned. And once learned, it couldn't be unlearned. After that night, the world didn't change for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. But their map of it did. They still walked onto stages, still heard applause, still played rooms that smelled like money and smoke. But something invisible now stood between them and the crowd. An understanding that not every laugh was safe to chase. Not every moment was theirs to take. Dean never talked about that night publicly. He didn't need to. Men like Dean learned to lock certain memories away. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what they represented. From then on, he chose his smiles more carefully. His charm became cooler, more deliberate. Less about winning the room, more about leaving it intact. Jerry carried it differently. He remembered the silence more than the threat. The way the room seemed to decide something without speaking. That awareness followed him for the rest of his career. The instinct to pull back, to redirect, to protect the moment before it collapsed. People later called him anxious, controlling, difficult. They never saw the danger that shaped him. What saved them that night wasn't bravery or status. It wasn't talent or fame. It was timing, and the willingness to step back instead of forward when pride demanded otherwise. There was no gunshot, no police report, no headline. Just a narrow escape that left no physical mark, only a permanent line etched into how both men moved through the world from that night on. And sometimes those are the stories that matter most. Because in the shadows of fame, survival often looks like nothing happened at all,